Thank you. Welcome everybody to the regular meeting of Lacombe City Council for Tuesday, April 11th. It is 5:27 p.m. and I'll call the meeting to order. Everyone had an opportunity to review agendas. Anything that you'd like removed from the consent agenda at this time? Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I was wondering if I could pull out the PRLS report infographic and the minutes of the March 27th council meeting.
Very good. Anything else? And for acceptance of the remaining items for the consent agenda, Councillor Hoekstra.
I move that we accept the consent agenda as amended.
Thank you. And I believe those are up on your machines now, so please go ahead and vote. It'll be up shortly. The votes are in. That's unanimously in favor. Thanks, everyone. With respect to the overall agenda, any additions, concerns? If not, we need a motion, please. Councillor Dallas.
Motion to accept the agenda as amended.
Thank you. One last chance. Sir Connick, are you going for your microphone or just a vote? Okay, you're being, it's good for you on the ball. Please go ahead and vote. That's unanimous as well. Thank you. We'll move right into, actually we will not. We have got two items to discuss. With respect to the Parkland Regional Library board talk minutes from February 23rd. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. Actually, it was the infographic. It was in last agenda and this agenda, so I was curious, was there a reason? Was there something updated that it was in the March 27th agenda as well as this one? So I didn't know. I wasn't at the last meeting, so I was curious.
Legislative Coordinator Balabono, has there been any updates to that report that you're aware of?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'm unaware that that report was included in the last meeting. This is the first time I've seen it.
Maybe it's, I noticed because I reviewed the last meeting because I wasn't here and then I had my agendas beside each other, but so there's no update. That's fine. Then no updates that I'm aware of.
Was there any items with respect to that infographic then or no?
No.
Okay, let's move on to the regular council meeting minutes from March 27th then.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. Under the consent agenda, there is a motion that I made and I wasn't in attendance at that meeting. And so I was curious. It says adoption of the minutes, that it was removed from, this is on page 2 of our minutes. Adoption of the minutes removed from consent agenda, March 13, regular council meeting minutes, moved by Councillor Hoekstra, that it be confirmed as presented. And
it was just in honor of your absence. Recalls who made that motion. If no one does, then we will have our legislative coordinator go and correct that item from the YouTube video. Thank you for noticing each of those. Does anybody else have any items on either of those things that were removed? We should have a motion accordingly. Councillor Hoekstra.
I move that we accept those two items as information. No, we adopt the minutes. So I guess we
Adopt is updated or something.
adopt as updated. Okay.
Very good. And I don't know if those are up on our machines or not. Might need some rewording, so I'll just ask everybody to vote with their hands. All those in favor, vote now. Any opposed? That's unanimous, thank you. That moves us down to presentations on behalf of the Economic Development Strategy and Update. Selected here as Director of the Point. I understand that Mr. Jared Beach is with us. Welcome. I'll just remind you to please use the microphone for the benefit of those watching at home and the members in the gallery. Have the light on. You can leave it on. Very good. The floor is yours.
All right, thanks everyone. Yes, this is our 2023 update. I think we have, oh, we got it already, right on. Cool, so yeah, we have a relatively sparsely worded presentation that I'm gonna go through. I'll add a little bit of color here and there. Feel free to interrupt me whenever you want if you have a pressing question, or save it till the end, doesn't matter to me. Right on. So yeah, let's get started to the next slide or two. The next slide just says 2022 highlights. Then you can go. Thank you. So we've got two slides of successes from 2022. Is this loud enough? Maybe I should be direct. Whoa, I wasn't in the right spot. Yeah, so we got two slides of successes for 2022 that we can go through. We've got ongoing sponsorship support, events and facilities. Some of the big ones are listed here. Ice Complex, I don't know if who hasn't been at the arena yet, but you can see our logos in there, front and back ice. Santa Claus Parade, Passport to Christmas, and Chamber Awards again. We've established a new downtown business subcommittee. Some notable points there are the first annual Halloween Spooktacular. Again, I was there myself. That was an awesome event. We had basically the streets were full of families and kids. That was great to see. And we've also done the reinvigorated Moonlight Madness event that takes place right after Light Up Lacombe there, or the Santa Claus Parade. Increased administrative oversight for Light Up Lacombe. This used to be operated by Lacombe Regional Tourism. We've taken over administration of that. Next slide, please. Consistent growth of Echo Energy and Echo Internet. I'll touch on that a bit more in the coming slides. Growing capacity for the Echo Food Rescue Program. This is going to be a big theme for today's update, as you'll see later. One of the more recent updates, we have a new coordinator employee in place that's going to help alleviate a lot of the basically mental and physical effort from the board volunteers that have been working hard prior to that individual coming on board. So that's great. Program connections established with multiple community organizations. This is like schools, FCSS. There's a partnership with Royal Oak Senior Home, I believe, and just even not official organizations, just groups that we like to see. We've got some great stories of Ukrainian families making use, things like that. Just overall very positive. And yeah, successful sponsor and volunteer recruitment. That's been going very well. We've continued the execution of the radio advertising subsidization program. Again, this year we've got more storefront enhancement grants awarded. I believe 11 is the exact number. And once again, this is basically an oversubscribed program that we have. So it's just working very well year after year. BGC Lacombe application approval for the launch of their program. That's previously known as Boys and Girls Club. Now it's BGC Lacombe. New skating benches were introduced at Crana and Royal Oak skating like lace-up areas. We piloted a summer movie in the park, and we did an overhaul and relaunch of the Echo Lacombe website with more info and a little bit easier accessibility of being able to point people there and see events, see updates, and see information more clearly, as well as an actual sort of mini homepage for the food rescue. The next couple slides are just going to be some pictures that I'll just outline. So we got the Learning Garden. This is actually approved in 2021, but it was a 2-year completion. So there's the final result. The storefront renovation there. I don't know if I ever say it properly, but 5024 general store. I don't know if it's 5,000 or whatever, but next slide, please. We've got a board member, our board member, Mike, doing some, in-action posing there at the food rescue. And then the picture on the right is the movie in the park, which, funny enough, that's before the event took place. So there was more than 4 people there. But that's one of the better pictures we had. So the next slide, please, is the skating benches. There's more than one. There's quite a few. I laced up my kids' skates probably 1,000 times this winter there, so that was nice. And then we have Councillor Hibbs at that's at the Santa Claus parade, right? I hope so. I don't know if that was like an after-hours event or something, but. Next slide, please. So here's some numbers, Echo Energy and Echo Food Rescue numbers. We're up to 747 accounts now. Yeah, next slide, please. We have, here's a graph basically from conception, or inception, I guess would be the right word. So you can see our steady growth continuing there, and I'll highlight more detail in the next slide. There has been steady growth up until a couple of years ago, but we've seen a sharp rise the last essentially 2 years, especially 2022, and even more so in 2023, which isn't listed here. So we're very happy to see that, and we also have a pretty firm belief that this is directly correlated to the consistent discussion and visibility presented through the food rescue. So yeah.
Excuse me, Jared.
Yeah.
Just to interrupt you. So 747 accounts. So
yeah,
for those that may have several utilities through Echo, is that if it's going to one household?
Yeah,
does
that'll
that count
be
as one account.
I believe that's is that our electricity? That's the highest. Yeah. So that'll be our electricity number. Slightly fewer for gas, and I'm not sure if we have our internet numbers listed here, but they're very slowly growing, but not quite that. That's our highest number, which is electricity only, but a large number of those subscribers will be also having gas and potentially internet as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure. Next slide, please. Here's the one most interesting number from our food rescue. We've estimated almost 65,000 pounds of food waste being diverted from the landfill. So that's pretty unbelievable, actually. Next slide is our strategic objective slides. So feel free to continue there. So for promoting economic growth, we're going to keep promoting the Downtown Storefront Enhancement Program, and encourage further collaboration via this new Downtown Business Subcommittee. Like I said, they took ownership of Spooktacular, and we're also that subcommittee is also going to take over the application reviews of the storefront enhancement applications. Stimulate business resiliency, reviewing growth opportunities for Lacombe Bucks program in partnership with the Chamber. Basically, we feel like there's lots of potential here. It works very well with the Passport to Christmas program, but we're keen to investigate further opportunities like year-round, rather than just being stuck on Passport to Christmas. And continue connecting businesses to entrepreneurial programs, which we've kind of done on a trickle basis with our connection to Berman. Next slide, please. Advancing Lacomb's economic diversity. Pretty basic point here, increasing social media presence. I'll just quickly touch on, again, the food rescue plays a pretty interesting role here. It's challenging. It's been challenging to have an active and growing follower base with just like our Echo Lacombe / Echo Energy utility pages. But the connection to the food rescue page, which is a very happening place, really like always updating hours, people are having conversations all the time. That kind of exploded our social presence, which I think ties into the growth that we've seen in the last couple of years. The Echo Food Rescue Facebook page has thousands of followers and likes. It's very, very active. Supporting unique community projects and programs. Something we've always done and will continue doing, and new, as well as tie into new items like the City Grant Workshop, I believe it's called. Maintaining Lacombe's high quality of life standard. Keep cross-promoting food rescue and eco energy initiatives, and continue trying to expand the food rescue initiative to further partners and organizations like food suppliers and stuff like that. And had a note, but I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Yeah. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. Yeah. Just a nice quote. And then that's it. Next slide is just I think there's one slide left. Yeah. Picture of food rescue. That's it. That's the high level summary for this year. Let me know if you have any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jared. So I would suggest that might be, or I'm hoping it's a priority for your new person on board to try and associate Echo with those utility accounts and whatnot to grow the customer base, because as great as that is, I still think there's room for a pretty drastic increase in numbers, because I think there's still a good number of people in Lacombe that really don't
Absolutely
know what on earth Echo is or what it does for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a part of their role. It's like, it's a fine balance, because you don't want to push something too much in somebody's face. That's kind of like a not even really a customer making use of something, but just somebody who's showing up, taking part in our program. You don't want to, push it on them with like pamphlets and stuff, but at the same time, always be open to the discussion, like, Echo food, what does Echo mean, and like stuff like that, and then somebody will hopefully always be there, whether it's the program coordinator or just volunteers being educated in general. Somebody will hopefully always be able to answer that question and give them the info they need. Like, this is supported by Echo Energy, and this is like the funds from that support projects like this, and then the conversation flows. So yeah, for sure.
Great, thank you. Not seeing a whole lot of lights on here, so you did such a good job. Nobody even has any questions for you. Director Lapointe?
I just wanted to pick up on the food rescue and its impact to the utility overall. Jared touched on it very quickly about the first 4 months of this year, but I don't think you shared a number. But typically, I think in the past, we would have had 70 to 80 signups in a year. Last couple of years, we've seen, that ebb to about 90 to 120 in a year. We've had 130 signups in the first 4 months of this year. So it's been a pretty dramatic increase at this point. And to your point, Mayor Creasy, I think the two are really just cross-pollinating one another at the moment.
Oh, very good to see. Thank you very much, Jared. We appreciate you coming in, and
Thanks
for
everyone.
all the great work that you and your team do for our community. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
CEO Gotti, we've got about 12 or 13 minutes here. Is there an item under Probably request for decision that we could go through in that length of time reasonably. 6.1 obviously doesn't work. Yeah. For the extended producer responsibility advocacy work. That works oh well because that's one of yours.
Sorry. The recent committee of the whole meeting, council reviewed some information that we had presented that was a response to a previous letter council had directed us to send about the extended producer responsibility and Lacombe's exclusion from the curbside recycling collection portion of that program. At the committee meeting, we heard some discussion of council is receptive to that being an important issue and wanted to see sort of a plan put together about what it would look like to advocate on this particular issue. And so we were able to get this, what's before you here, together. It is a lot of the previous information we included, but we also put forward some specific steps that we would propose. And those steps include informing the government of Alberta, the city of Lacombe's ongoing concerns with the exclusion of the city via letter from the mayor sent to Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas. We'll also be sharing that letter with your endorsement with local and provincial media. And we'll look to include co-signing mayoral signatures from other cities, including the city of Wetaskiwin, potentially the city of Camrose, who are in the same situation, facing the same exclusion. As we'll hope to see some action actually rather quickly, but as a backup plan, we would like to bring to you a proposed special resolution for the Alberta Municipalities Conference in the fall. And the deadline there is May 31st to put forward a special resolution. Again, we'd be looking for secondary signatures from other municipalities. At this point, I am positioning it or have positioned it as really an issue facing cities, that cities should be treated equitably in the province, because of course the province is not able to provide curbside recycling program to every village or town, or hamlet in the province. They do need to look to make that distinction somewhere. And given that there is a small number of cities and a few of them are in the same situation, I think that's the way we would go initially. We'll be meeting with the administration of the city of Wetaskiwin over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, and making sure that they're aligning with us on the strategy as well. So we're open to input or providing any answers we can to questions you might have.
Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I think it's great that we're teaming up with Wetaskiwin and Camrose. Was Lloydminster not involved with that too, or was that a mistake? Was I misinformed?
I'm just waiting to hear back from them still at this point. I'm not sure how the legislation specifically impacts them because they're actually covered by a charter rather than the Municipal Government Act. And so they're just looking into that right now as well.
Yeah, I thought there might be some issues with it being a border city, but us working together and doing a resolution for AUMA, I think is a great idea, and put a little more pressure on the government to change this policy, which penalizes our citizens for no reason, and we still have to pay for it. So that seems a little, well, not a little unfair, totally unfair. So I look forward to this. I think it'll be great.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just curious, as we discontinued curbside pickup, obviously because it was a 66% increase in cost at the time and less materials were going to be picked up, did Camrose and Wetaskiwin also discontinue curbside pickup at the time within the last few years as well? So are the ones that were ineligible, or is it all, how do you put it, consistent as two reasons?
I couldn't speak to those specific municipalities and what their past service provision is, but the threshold that the province is relying upon is whether or not you had a curbside collection program in place and operating as of November 30th, 2022.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I do really appreciate the plan. I know I did mention that we would, possibly present a resolution. I think that's a really excellent idea, and I'm glad that we're potentially moving forward that. I assume that we will see some sort of draft prior to the deadline so that we can hone in on it and get it just right. Is that correct?
You assume correctly. It is being worked on right now.
Too sweet. Perfect. All right. And then the other question I had, again, I think it just helps with advocacy if we can sort of understand sort of the situations that are happening in other communities as well. Of course, I think we've got a pretty good understanding of what's happening here, but there's going to be slight differences for other places. Is a possible even virtual meeting being considered possibly sometime, obviously before convention, so that we would have a chance to sort of discuss these matters? Just a thought. We've done these with, some other organizations like Wolf Creek, for example, lately, and we found that to be quite beneficial. So would there be harm in potentially having some sort of inter-council, like I said, virtual meeting just to make it convenient?
Chief Gotti, I'll let you think about that one for a minute. And I just wanted to reiterate that letter that's going to, or I would expect is, depending on council, going to our MLA, outlines that the only two reasons that the communities were being excluded were because they either didn't have an existing curbside recycling program or no recycling program at all, neither a depot nor the recycling program. So I mean, that's the two choices. I'm not really sure what difference it makes which one it is. The simple fact of the matter is that just like us, all of our citizens are going to be paying for a program of which they're not going to receive anything for it, which just is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. G.A. Gotti?
If I was the province, I would say, well, nothing at all. We will still offer a depot. That's correct. Yes. Just not a curbside recycling program like will be enjoyed by basically all the other urban municipalities in this region. We do not have currently planned any sort of joint meetings. I would say, to me, the best avenue would be actually to go through the mid-sized cities group potentially, because they are the other cities that are likely to have some success with advocacy. Again, I think a very small municipality, the province is going to be easily able to say, well, it's not feasible for us to deploy a program in every area. So I have administratively talked to the CAOs of that group, and I'm just waiting for some responses back. And I know Mayor Creasy will be meeting with them in the coming months as well. And so that is something we could bring to that group.
The ears have just certainly perked up in Cochrane, where the chair of that group sits. He'll be happy to hear that. So very good. Anybody care to make a motion? I mean, the outline is there. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I move that council approve the advocacy strategy requesting curbside recycling collection for the City of Lacombe through the Government of Alberta's Extended Producer Responsibility Regulations Program as presented.
Thank you. Any additional questions or concerns? If not, you must be prepared to vote. So I believe that should be up on your machines now. Please go ahead and vote. That is unanimous. Thanks, everyone. So we are very near 6 o'clock, so I think we will move into our public hearing. We're just so darn efficient. We're just a couple minutes ahead of time is all. So on your agenda is item 5.1, the public hearing for the land use bylaw amendment to site specific in the I-1 district. And with us today, so everybody's aware, Planner Sarmad Abbasi, thank you for joining us. Appreciate that. So, as mayor, I declare the statutory public hearing for bylaw 400.44 now open. And that this hearing is held pursuant to procedural bylaw section 6.11 and sections 7, 8, 230, 606, and 640 of the Municipal Government Act 2000 as amended, and request the legislative coordinator to confirm the purpose of this public hearing, that the statutory public hearing notice was advertised in the local newspaper, and that any written submissions received and not included in the public hearing agenda package are read into the record. Coordinator
Mayor.
Bellabono.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I just wanted to call a point of order that a public hearing cannot start before 6 p.m., but it can start after 6 p.m. as advertised.
You're gonna have to talk for a minute and a half then.
In the meantime, I had looked into Councillor Hoekstra's PRL system annual report. What happened was the library had submitted a report last meeting for March 27th. They called it version 3. It was put in the agenda. This time they submitted this report as final version, but they actually called it the wrong word, which was the infographic. That was my misunderstanding, but that's why it was put in the agenda 2 meetings. But there is no difference.
Appreciate that. Tick tock, it's almost 6 o'clock. You're gonna make me reread this at 6 o'clock, aren't you? Very good. It is now 6 o'clock. So once again, as mayor, I will declare the statutory public hearing for bylaw 400.44 now open, and that this hearing is held pursuant to procedural bylaw 6.11 and sections 7, 8, 230, 606, and 640 of the MGA 2000 as amended, and request the legislative coordinator to confirm the purpose of this public hearing, that the statutory public hearing notice was advertised in the local newspaper, and that any written submissions received and not included in the public hearing agenda package are read into the record.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy and Council. The purpose of the public hearing is to allow the general public to provide input to the proposed amending bylaw 400.44, given first reading February 27th, 2023. Bylaw 400.44 proposes to amend the land use bylaw 400. If approved, bylaw 400.44 will allow a site-specific exception in the light industry district I-1 to allow as discretionary use a daycare facility on lot 12, block 3, plan 1720620. The subject site is located at 4013 53rd Avenue. Per section 606 of the MGA requirements for advertising, a public hearing notice was advertised as shown on page 74 of the agenda in the Lacombe Express Thursday, March 23rd, 2023, and Thursday, March 30th, 2023. Mayor Creasy and Council, no written submissions were received, and the city received no registrations from members of the public to speak.
Thank you very much. I'll remind all persons giving oral presentations this evening are to clearly state their name, and presentations are to be brief and to the point. The order of the statutory public hearing presentation will be as follows. Our development officer, or designate in this case, followed by those in favor, and then those opposed, and then by any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. So, Planner Abbasi, I'll just remind you to turn on your microphone there when you speak, and when you're prepared, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. An application has been made for a site-specific exception to allow as a discretionary use a daycare facility on Lot 12, Block 3, Plan 1720620 in the Light Industrial District. The subject site is located at 4013 53 Avenue and contains an existing building housing several uses. The daycare facility is proposed for a vacant bay, the former site of Dancer's Edge, a discretionary fitness facility use. If approved, the proposed bylaw would allow the daycare use only for the subject site. The subject site is located on the south side of 53 Avenue, east of Wolf Creek Drive. There is a place of worship at the subject site, which is not an allowable use in the I-1 district. However, it is important to note that the place of worship has applied for a site-specific amendment, site-specific exception to the I-1 district, and staff are processing the LUB amendment for council's consideration at a future meeting. Combined with the existing place of worship, the daycare facility could result in 2 site exceptions for this property, provided that council approve both uses. The bay proposed for a daycare facility contains approximately 6,000 square footage of floor area. There is a front and rear parking lot, and the building can be accessed through the rear or front. The building has several other uses that require parking and would need to share on-site parking with any new uses. The proponent indicates that parking for the daycare client families will be managed as a drop-off and pickup scenario. The daycare is proposing to be open Monday to Friday with drop-off and pickups for children from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Capacity of up to 125 children is anticipated, with 12 to 19 staff dedicated on the site while the facility is open. The proponent has noted that they would require 2 30 by 50 outdoor fenced play areas, which would take away approximately 3 parking stalls from the subject site, which will be touched on in the next slide. So in total, there are 45 parking stalls on site. If the proposed development is approved and development proceeds, stalls will be removed from the rear to accommodate the fenced yards, leaving an estimated 42 stalls. Based on the calculations shared in the table, only 4 parking stalls will remain to accommodate the place of worship use, which means that there would be a maximum of 16 seats. The current existing place of worship is larger than 16 seats, meaning that parking relaxations or variances to either the parking requirements for the daycare or the place of worship will be necessary if these uses are approved. The subject site meets the landscaping requirements of the land use bylaw. The proponent has not indicated any additional landscaping that will be taking place on the subject site. So now we'll be going over some of the planning considerations. Now, just to summarize, administration is of the opinion that a daycare facility use is not compatible in this light industrial district. Placing a daycare facility in the I-1 district will likely lead to land use and operational conflicts. Permitted uses in the I-1 district, such as heavy equipment sales and services, cannabis production and distribution, and manufacturing facilities are allowed in adjacent bays of the property and on neighboring properties. The business operations at these uses and the industrial traffic associated with them could lead to conflicts, especially where young children are present and potentially playing outside. Children will be outside in the rear parking lot play area as noise, dust, fumes, and odors, or other industrial byproducts from adjacent bays may spill over within the lot boundary. Placing young children in an active industrial area may pose long and short-term health and safety risks. Furthermore, the location does not allow children to easily and safely access community play spaces or provide safe walking spaces to community amenities. a daycare facility at this property would not be within any walking distance of playground or park spaces, and there are no sidewalks in the area. Currently, 16 of the city's 27 total land use districts allow a daycare facility use as either a permitted or discretionary use. This gives the applicant quite a broad range of subject sites to work with across the city of Lacombe. Furthermore, approving bylaw 400.44 would create an unfair advantage as a daycare facility within a typical residential or commercial use would be subject to greater requirements, such as parking or landscaping and et cetera. Continuing on, Lacombe has a set amount of planned industrial and service properties. Prioritizing industrial land for industrial uses will prevent any short supply of industrial land in Lacombe. It is acknowledged that industrial operations and land uses can evolve over time. There are many examples in larger centers of former industrial areas transitioning and redeveloping into more commercial type uses, which could include daycares. Based on the current land uses at 4013 53 Avenue, the parcel appears to be transitioning more towards a commercial or commercial industrial type use. And the LUB already has a site which encapsulates the nature of the site, which is a transitional commercial district, and which we would deem to be more appropriate for this type of use. The purpose of this C3 district is to provide an area that is transitioning from industrial development to commercial development in areas having major thoroughfare exposure, and in which uses create an attractive environment that is accessible to both vehicles and pedestrians. It is important to note that administration has not reviewed the specific impacts of this C3 designation on the subject parcel and the existing uses. However, should council wish to explore that option or consider any new business commercial blended zones for parcels within this area, they could direct administration to explore this option and return with a report for consideration. The subject site was reviewed against the MDP. More specifically, the MDP policy relates, which states that where opportunities exist to transition industrial lots to commercial lots, the city may consider these changes to land use districts. So the MDP does not mention the possibility for commercial uses to be allowed in industrial zones. Rather, it suggests that the designation be changed entirely. The subject site was also reviewed against the LUB, and under which the proposed activity would be a site-specific exception as a discretionary use under the I-1 district. So given that the site has a number of diverse land uses operating or proposed, administration is providing several options to council for consideration. The first option is to refuse the site exception request. Refusing the proposed site exception would preserve the industrial bay for future industrial uses and limit the potential for land use conflicts. If option one proceeds, City of Lacombe administration could work with the daycare facility operators to assist them in locating an appropriately designated site outside the industrial area. The second option is to approve the proposed site exception for a discretionary use and address any issues through future development permit conditions. Allowing a proposed discretionary use would meet the applicant's needs. Additionally, the large capacity of 125 children will grant parents in Lacombe more options to enroll their children in local daycare. Possible site conflicts will be addressed at the development permit stage, such as parking or site improvements placed on the daycare facility. The third option is to defer the consideration until the future bylaw amendment for a place of worship is addressed by council. Consideration of the amount of parking required by the existing church use would be reviewed to ensure that both site exceptions are planned comprehensively. For instance, a preliminary review of the site suggests that if the daycare was approved without parking variances, only 4 stalls would remain for the place of worship. which may not meet their needs. Deferring final reading of bylaw 400.44 until the place of worship amendment is reviewed over the next few weeks will allow both council and the place of worship applicants full information to review the potential impacts of both proposed site exceptions together. Now, the final option is to refuse the bylaw amendment and direct administration to return with a report on the potential redesignation of the property to the C3 district or a business commercial type district. The subject site currently consists of a restaurant use, a manufacturing use, and a non-compliant place of worship. It can be reasonably assumed that currently this site is operating more so as a commercial strip rather than a traditional industrial site. The redesignation to a C3 district or a customized business industrial district could be a more fitting designation for the nature of the subject site. Under the C3 district, the existing restaurant use would be a permitted use and the manufacturing use would be a discretionary use. It is worth noting that a daycare facility and a place of worship are not currently listed as either permitted or discretionary use within the C3 district. Therefore, further review to consider these additions to the district would be necessary. The potential redesignation of the subject site to the C3 designation will require approximately 6 to 8 months to give administration adequate time to prepare research. So based on the concerns with site suitability and land use conflicts within the I-1 district, and based on several other existing land use districts that allow daycare facilities presently, administration recommends that council proceed with option 1 to refuse bylaw 400.44. All neighboring property owners within 60 meters were consulted via direct written notification of this application and the public hearing date and time. The broader public was consulted through notice of the proposed amendment and public hearing in the Lacombe Express and information posted on the city's website. The opportunity to provide feedback was available through written submissions and the public hearing. Administration received no submissions from the public at the time of preparing this report. And with that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Planner Abassi. Appreciate that. Next up, anyone speaking or wishing to speak in favor of bylaw 400.44? This is your opportunity to do so. And just a reminder for anybody wishing to do so to state their name into the microphone once it's lit up for the record.
So my name is Bob Wilson. I'm representing the landlords Danny Beach and Don Timestra and 3 Kids Daycare. We've been approached by not only one daycare, but 2 other ones where there's, they claim that there's a shortage of approximately 300 plus kid placements in Lacombe, and a lot of the kids are going to Black Falls because there's not enough room in Lacombe. So we think the subject building is ideal for in and out access, and we don't agree with the staff recommendation that there's a shortage of parking from the back of the building to the next property line. There's probably 120 feet, so there could be an additional 15 to 20 parking stalls back there. And in the past, there was a daycare approximately 200 feet from this location that was approved. So we just feel that if it's delayed 8 months, you know, well, we look for other locations. We don't think that's acceptable. And the people, the other daycare, 2 other daycare parties have been looking, and they haven't been able to locate anything in town. So we just feel this is a perfect location for it. Anything, Dan?
I'm Danny Beach. I'm one of the owners. Like I feel everything around us is commercial. There's the car wash behind us. On the other side of the street, there's a furniture store, you know, everything around us is commercial. There's nothing industrial there. So I don't know what to say. Just, I don't see where that should be a concern about big trucks not being around there. Thanks.
Not at this time, just presentations. If there's any clarity anybody requires, I'll certainly bring it up. Thank you both. Anyone else choosing to speak in favor? The floor is yours, Mr. Amershaw. You do now.
I think I've got the mic. It's privileged to be here before City Councilor, Mayor Creasy and Council, and the higher echelons of the staff of our vibrant, thriving, and welcoming Lacombe. Initially, I was just going to come up and give my support for as a business owner on Wolf Creek Drive since 2000. I started my business actually, if memory serves me correct, in the year 2000 in Mr. Creasy's building. And I see some of my neighbors at this table as well. Councillor Gullickson worked for many years on Wolf Creek Drive, and Councillor Ross worked Wolf Creek Drive. And Denise, I believe your partner at one time worked at Wolf Creek Drive as well. But as I said, I started off to just say yes, but your planner's comments really got me kind of thinking about this. That space has been vacant for close to a year. I remember distinctly helping the realtor, Bob Wilson, take the for lease sign out of the back of his pickup truck and place it on the boulevard nearly a year ago. And I'd hate to be in the shoes of a landowner who has built a building to be sitting vacant for a year because his building fits the purpose, but the space or the businesses around don't really fit the industrial, as Mr. Beach has said. Everybody is commercial there. Wolf Creek has an awful lot to offer to businesses and to the clients. We do have plenty of parking. It's all off-street parking. And even if it's not designated parking, you can go to the backs of the buildings. There's lots of room. There's lots of room for those two 30 by 50 outdoor play spaces. And if an entrepreneur is prepared to take this, we'll call it a risk, I think that the decision makers of a vibrant, thriving, and welcoming community should give them their very best chance. I did kind of like what the planner did say about option 4, and maybe that is something that should be considered in the future for looking at buildings such as the building that Mr. Beach and I'm going to say Donnie and Danny own, and businesses I own. Maybe you should change those into a C3, because that's more what we are. People aren't, industry's not coming, it's commercial are coming. And I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of bylaw 400.44? One last chance. Then I would call anybody that wishes to speak in opposition to bylaw 400.44. Please step forward now. Doesn't look like a stampede, but I'll give you one more opportunity. Very good. And The final category, any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. Now is your opportunity to do so. Please step forward. An equal number on that call. I would suggest that anybody that wanted to be heard has had a fair opportunity to do so. Seat still empty, so I will declare that the public hearing for bylaw 400.44 closed at 6:23 p.m. Thank you, everyone. If I could ask that Planner Massey come up to the front again. I think we will move into requests for decision. The first item is 6.1 bylaw 400.44, the land use bylaw amendment to site specifics, second and third reading. Planner Massey, I see you've got some assistance as well. Manager Hackett, thank you for joining us. Who's going to be handling this item? Planner Massey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary Creasy. I believe that Planner Abassi has presented all of the information, but we're happy to answer any questions. We do have a recommendation before council tonight of refusing bylaw 400.44. The report does outline some other options for council's consideration as well, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. CEO Gowdy, go ahead.
So thank you, Planner Abassi. That was a great presentation, and I appreciated some of the comments from those that spoke in favor as well. But I do want to respond to a couple of them that, you know, there was an assertion that it's a commercial area. It's essentially a commercial area there, and it's all commercial uses around there. That's really not accurate. This is not an area that has been developed to the standards that we would insist upon for a commercial area. It has been developed to an industrial standard. It's across the street from a recycling depot, and it's beside a storage unit, or a storage units depot. So if council chooses to proceed with this, the world is not going to end. The sky is not going to fall. There has been daycares and other uses in that area before, and they have not resulted in catastrophic conflicts. However, when you look at land use planning principles and trying to regulate uses and ensure that there is the proper use of land, commercial areas are to be commercial, industrial areas are to be industrial, and we even have a transitionary zone for those that are rightfully transitioning from one to the other. But typically where you see that, say on 46th Avenue here in Macomb, you're seeing insistence on sidewalks going in, storm drainage systems, not just open ditches. So there's a plan in place for that transition to occur, not just, well, they've had enough commercial uses there that now we have to, you know, let them have that zoning. So I think that you should be careful to honor the entrepreneurial spirit that people put forward here. There was comments that, well, there's other daycares here, you know, that you can't find space in Macomb. Well, am I to believe that there's no available commercial space in Macomb that would suitably house a daycare? There is. There's plenty of commercial investors who have put significant investments in play to develop land to commercial standards, develop property to commercial standards, and when they see changing goalposts where, oh, suddenly the uses that I'm trying to attract are now being let to kind of leak out into these other areas that were not previously considering them, that does make it hard as an investor to know where to put your investment. If you see this track record of, well, it starts out in industrial, but basically we say yes to commercial uses in industrial zones, I as an investor would would prefer to invest in an industrial area, knowing that I can later attract those same uses that are today only listed in the commercial area. So I do want you to have that whole view and not just look at what's before you here today with this one specific decision. It's not going to have catastrophic fallout. And I think that there is a need for daycare, and this is a suitable location that can house it. But it's not the most suitable location. It was not developed with that in mind, and there is areas within Lacombe that are more suitable that were developed with these uses in mind.
Thank you, Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'm in support of it, and I can understand the explanation we just received, but somewhat in this area, it's already down the road of maybe inconsistencies, we can already say. I've heard from daycare providers that they have tried to go other locations as they've been deferred because of parking, and then they lapse continuing with their entrepreneur area of interest. This is a very much needed area of our community that needs to be addressed. I can understand the concerns that was just expressed to us, but I think we've obviously haven't got any really negative feedback. I kind of like, so I would like to go ahead and make the motion of second reading for the proposed bylaw 400.44 to allow daycare facility as a discretionary use on Lot 12, Block 3, Plan 1720620 in the Light Industrial District 1 as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I was just wondering, when you look at figure 1 and you have that building outlined in pink, what is potentially, is there something in the lot to the east of it, or is that an empty lot?
Mayor Creasy through to Councillor Hoekstra, that is currently a vacant lot to the east. It is zoned or designated I-1, so all of the uses in I-1 could potentially be approved, including the permitted uses, the heavier permitted uses. So that is something we weighed in our recommendation as well.
And I appreciate that, because if you are having a play space right next to that type of use, because right now there was the comment that parking could sort of move all, I don't know if they're meaning into that area too. We have to keep that in mind, that that is an empty lot and is zoned for those uses.
So just for clarity, I think the area for parking was referred to the area contained within the lot, within the subject lot. Yes, there is an empty lot further to the east, but that is not relevant to these proceedings. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I like this proposal. It is something that is needed in our community, and certainly the location of it. I think Bob could attest to that, and Danny, as far as people that work in that area, it would be very convenient to drop the kids off and pick them up at a daycare located so close to the work site. So I'm in favor of this. I think we are moving to commercial. I do agree with Seo Gowdy on the fact that maybe we have too much industrial, need more commercial, and maybe there's a lack of commercial within our community. So I'm going to vote for this. I like it, and I look forward to the development of that property.
Thank you, Councillor Dallas.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess I have a few questions. Do we have any insight on why other more suitable locations have not been chosen so far?
I'm going to interrupt there. I appreciate you asking that question. I don't really think that we do have access to that information. I'm not necessarily that has any bearing on our discussion today. That was brought forward by the proponents that was an issue, unless they choose to put forth some sort of backup. I don't know that we necessarily should consider that.
Okay, sounds good. Well, then we will disregard that question. And my next question is, what was the designation for zoning in place when the building was built?
Mayor Creasy, Councillor Dallas, the building was built as I-1, and which has a list of discretionary uses, which includes restaurants. So the restaurant is there as a discretionary use, included fitness facility, which is was there previously, but it has been designated I-1 from the time it was built. So it was built to industrial standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hibbs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I do appreciate that this was brought as a discretionary use if it were to proceed. I will be voting against this, and it's primarily because I don't believe a daycare facility is appropriate. I once upon a time worked in a daycare for a number of summers while I was a teenager, and the thought of kids going to a daycare and playing out in a yard that would be in an industrial section is just, it's appalling on a number of levels. I'm really sad that that even has to be considered, honestly. But that's a separate issue. This building was built the way that it was built in the area that it was built for certain purposes. I'm sure they were never imagining that a daycare facility was going to go there because it's quite honestly just not a good idea. I'm interested by the option 4 that was proposed. I think that is something that maybe long-term we should be considering is, you know, maybe along Wolf Creek Drive, that should be a C3 district. That's a possibility, although I'm not here to argue that that's what we should do. I'm here to state that I think that the appropriate action is to refuse this application. There just are better places for daycares. Maybe they're not supersized daycares, maybe they're smaller ones in multiple places, but you want a nice environment for kids to be in, day out, where they have access to playgrounds and facilities that they can walk to. And I'm just really disappointed that this would really be considered as an appropriate place for a daycare. So that's my thoughts, and I will be voting against it.
Lots of interesting input this evening on this subject. I think in a perfect world, some would consider that this building would be better if it was in a different area than what it is for this purpose. However, I'm a big believer in the free enterprise system, and I would suggest that parents make the ultimate decision whether or not they choose to take their children here. That is the true litmus test on this for me anyway. I am in support of it, and I think that it offers another alternative for parents. I think over time there very well may be other options available, but at this particular time, I think it's viable. There's been some comments about having children in an area like this, and we have other examples in our community where the play areas and whatnot are basically on parking lot surface and whatnot. So I think that if done appropriately, that there can be a rather nice environment produced for this, and hopefully it'll be that way. We need to consider that there still are provincial rules in place that any operator must abide by here, and those facilities will have to be in place to make it acceptable for those children to offer the services that are required. So yeah, for me, I'm in favor of it, but I certainly appreciate everybody's input, and I appreciate administration putting forth a good overall perspective of the entire project. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. Sorry, I had other questions. We had a question, or we have discussed daycares in Lacombe before, and I guess I'm curious where the stats are coming that 125 seats are needed in our community, whether that is I wouldn't have, I would have liked to have seen some information from the proponent or the person who wants to set up this facility, that it has to be in that kind of situation, that we have to bend so many rules, if you will, in order to get it to sit there. Whereas I agree 100% with Councillor Hibbs, very articulate in saying the reasons why we shouldn't have it there. When we are developing areas, we have rules in place because of safety and walkability. Like, those two things really strike me as very strong needs for children. They need to be in a safe area, clear air, and a walkable area. And even the previous daycare that's referred to is in a very walkable area, regardless of what their play space looks like. And so I 100% am behind Councillor Hibbs. And I guess I would love to see stats that a community of ours, how many seats does a community like ours need in terms of a daycare facilities? And should we be tripping over ourselves as councillors to provide a space when we don't even have those stats in front of us, that we have to bend all the development rules?
So just try and offer some clarification, I don't believe there was a suggestion there are 25 or 125 spots needed. It was that off our report that drop-offs and pickups for children from 6 to 6, capacity of up to 125 children is anticipated, with 12 to 19 staff dedicated on the site. It has nothing to do with what is the requirement in our community. Councillor Hibbs? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Connick, I couldn't see your light there.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I agree with a lot of the statements that have been said on both sides of the argument. I agree that I don't think, ideally in a perfect world, as the mayor had alluded to, that this is the best spot for this. I agree with Councillor Hibbs and Hoekstra in terms of walkability and so forth. This is not the best site. However, I understand square footage rise. If you look around, that's what's available for commercial in the city. I think you will struggle to find, there are commercial bays out there for sure. I could think of at least half a dozen that are open right now, but I don't think they meet the 6,000 square feet that the proponent, and I agree with Councillor Hoekstra, it'd be nice if the proponent were here, we could find out exactly why they're looking for this much space. But in terms of that level of space, I don't think you'll find it. You'll find lots of 3,000 square foot bays in commercial areas of the city available, but nothing this size. But we've seen this play out before, not even in terms of daycares. I mean, there's a gymnastic facility not far from here, I believe still in I-1. I don't know if they're still there, but they were at one point. There was one. There's a boxing studio in another I-zoning, industrial zoning. This is a struggle we have in this community to find spaces for these businesses to establish themselves. And I would agree in some respects in terms of the parking, but again, when he talks about, Planner Abbasi had spoken about conflict perhaps with the church. Well, the church is only going to be there on the weekend, and this is going to be from Monday to Friday. So I don't see that conflict outlined there in terms of parking. Incidentally, I don't have a problem with the church being there either. So I think I could get behind it. Again, it's not ideal. I mean, children are not going to be playing in the street. They will be in fenced off areas. They will be at the rear of the property. They will be supervised. There's a daycare facility in downtown that has a very low fence. I'm assuming this one will be much higher. So I think in terms of safety, I'm not too worried about the kids' safety. As the mayor had alluded to, I think the parents will ultimately decide if this is a safe place or not. Again, I think it's unfortunate we don't have, again, I'm not 100% on the commercial space that's available, but I don't think we have the space that this proponent is looking for. So, and I think there is a case to be made for more daycare, as daycare costs are getting cheaper through federal initiatives. There will be more and more people taking advantage of that than they have in the past. So I think there will be a need for more daycare space. Again, it's not the perfect spot, but I think I'll begrudgingly get behind it. Thank you.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you. Just a follow-up point or two. I'm certainly not against daycare because I totally appreciate that that's an absolute necessity in today's world. And yes, we definitely need more spaces. I just think that this area is inappropriate. And just one further point on that, I'm just wondering what we would think about a school being in that area. Like, it's ridiculous. I'm sorry, but it is. Kids do not belong in an industrial section. It's just that simple.
Thanks, everyone. So I guess just one final item, because it was mentioned a couple times about walkability. Having operated a business on the same street, although further north from here for a couple of decades, I would suggest that you're right, it is not very walkable. In saying that, I would expect the next person that drops the child off to the daycare there walking will be a very slim minority. I mean, it just won't happen. Generally speaking, parents who utilize these facilities are doing so because they have other time commitments, whether it's work or whatever, and the chances of them walking to the facility are very remote. But once again, I appreciate all the input. And if we didn't all have different points of view on these types of things, there'd be no need for public interactions like this. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. Just to clarify my comments about walkability, and I believe that was the developers or the staff's comments too. It's that groups of children will walk because that's what daycares do with their staff, and that they will walk to a playground or they will walk to a grocery store to experience shop and whatever, to learn about that. It's not about the parent walking to drop their child off. And so this location does not offer that opportunity to walk a group of children.
Thank you. Any other comments or concerns? I think that the motion for second reading is on your unit. So I guess for the record, I'll have Legislative Coordinator Bella Bono read it back for everyone so we're crystal clear on the intent. Please.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. The motion from Councillor Ross on the floor is that council give second reading of bylaw 400.44 to allow a daycare facility as discretionary use on lot 12, block 3, plan 1720620 in the light industrial district I1 as presented.
Thank you. Councillor Koenig.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just one further comment I would want to make, and I would agree that I think Councillor Gullickson and Ross had alluded to. I think we need to perhaps as a council just revisit this area because it may be industrial, but a great many parts of Wolf Creek Drive are and would be considered commercial. So maybe we have to revisit that in the future in terms of maybe rezoning a number of areas just along Wolf Creek Drive in the future.
Thank you. With respect to the motion before us, please go ahead and vote now. Those votes are in, and it is passed by simple majority. Councillors Ross, Gullickson, Creasy, and Koenig voting in favor of second reading, and naturally then against the remaining three, which is Councillors Dallas, Hibbs, and Hoekstra. Thanks, everyone.
Mayor Creasy, did council want to proceed with third reading tonight?
That's a very good question. I don't know. But I was just going to say that there is a light or two going on here. So Councillor Koenig?
I would be prepared to make that motion that we give third reading to bylaw 400.44. Would it be as presented or do I have to allow as presented? Thank you.
Thank you. So this motion for, excuse me, for third reading, are there I'll give opportunity for additional comments. Should anybody care to make any? Seeing none, I will call the question. Please vote accordingly. I think that's up in your machines now. If memory serves me correctly, that is similar to the second motion vote, so I won't repeat them all, but it is 4 in favor and 3 opposed. Thanks, everyone. So the next item up is under request for decision, category 6 is 6.2, financial reserve policy and reserve cleanup. And Senior Manager McKinnon and the CAO both looks like are going to have some input on this item. Who's going to start us off? Senior Manager McKinnon, we'll defer to you. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Creasy and Council. Tonight I'm here to present the financial reserve policy for Council's review, input, and endorsement. Reserves are created when funds are set aside for future purpose. Funds within a reserve are restricted, meaning they are meant for the purposes outlined in the reserve definition. There are internally restricted and externally restricted reserves, which we'll talk about more when we look at the different reserve categories. The purpose of a reserve policy is to maintain consistent standards and guidelines for the management of reserves and execution of reserve transactions, and to ensure that all reserve transactions are approved by Council and carried out in accordance with Council's approval. A reserve policy enhances a municipality's ability to have financial strength. We have, if our reserves are healthy, we have options to purchase and buy things we would like to see happen in our community. It offers flexibility, ability to adjust and absorb unexpected expenditures or reductions in revenue. It offers cash flow management. We can invest and earn interest on investments and also bridge the timing between the collection of taxes and the expenditures of the city. Also, it gives us the ability to achieve council vision. Reserves are a means to fund council's long-term vision for the city of Lacombe. So strategic plan priorities can also be achieved through funding capital projects and one-time projects that are funded through reserves. The financial reserve policy contains 6 reserve categories. Schedule A of the policy lists the reserves within each category. That's found on page 6 of your reserve policy. The stabilization and contingency reserve category is created to act as an insurance to stabilize the unexpected impacts of revenue and expenditure changes, and also to fund one-time projects. Project reserves are intended to fund specific operating or capital projects. We currently have no reserves designated in this category. There was a typo in the report, although the general capital reserve was noted that can support new projects if it's within the availability of the funds in that reserve. Infrastructure lifecycle maintenance and replacement reserves are used to fund ongoing costs of maintaining or replacing the city's assets. This is our largest reserve category within the city of Lacombe. Specific purpose reserves indicate the intended purpose as it's outlined in the reserve description. And restricted reserves are where allowable uses are established by either authority, agreement, or legislation other than those created by the city. And developer levy reserves are used to fund new assets infrastructure related to the growth of the city and are funded later by developer levies. Usually infrastructure happens before the levies are collected, so reserve is often in a deficit balance. Schedule B of the reserve policy provides a definition of each reserve with a name, category, purpose, source of funding, use of funding, optimal balance, duration, and whether the reserve is interest-bearing or not. Schedule B of the policy can be found on page 7 to 32. Reserve transfers. Funding to and from reserve should be approved through council via existing municipal policies, the annual budget process, year-end reserve request and approval process, approved reserve description, and council resolution. The operating budget must include the estimated amount to be transferred to reserves. The operating budget presented to council will include a table outlining total transfer to reserves and estimated withdrawals for that year. The annual capital budget and 10-year capital plan will also identify reserves as funding sources. Reserve reports. During the annual budget process, a reserve report will be presented with a summary of the reserve balances, commitments, and optimal balances if they are applicable. The City of Lacombe Reserve Policy. In order to meet the new policy, we have to do a little bit of reserve cleanup. Table 1 shows any additions and deletions and name changes that we need to meet the policy guidelines. And Table 2 shows transfers from accounts to new or existing reserves. Table 1 and 2 can be found on page 4 or 5 of the request for decision report. So the recommended motions for council tonight are to approve the financial reserve policy 13.201.01.23, rescind the reserve and equity accounts policy that it replaces, and approve changes in reserves identified in table 1 and 2. And now I'm happy to answer any questions you have about reserves.
Thank you very much for that report. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'm kind of curious with rising interest rates in recent times and inflation. Really the borrowing and our previous interest rates was really quite minimal and wasn't really a incentive to increase our reserves. But now when we have the cost of projects significantly higher in the last 3 to 5 years, and now prime is 6.75, and I don't know what our municipal rate is, and I apologize, but would it be worth looking into putting more into reserves? With all due respect to tax increases, nobody wants to hear that word, but when we start reviewing our 10-year capital program, we've got some facilities that are aging that you put within that 10 years, some 25-year-old facilities, and in 10 years, obviously, you're 35. And at a rate of inflation, does it justify to review that and maybe increasing the reserves and explaining to our citizens that it is viable to relook at it, because there's going to be some needs coming forth that I know, for example, on rec board, our swimming pool is really at capacity to our population now, and it is already 25 years old. A 10-year capital plan, as Councillor Connick alluded to, Public Works was, talked about how many years ago, and now it's come to fruition. And I just think we need to relook in the future of possibly another committee meeting and readdress our 10-year capital plan. And it's just an area of interest, I think, that should need to be looked at. Thank you, but great work. But I'd like to see some numbers and how we could, as business-wise, how we could basically look into some things more further.
Senior Manager McKinnon, did you have anything in
I
response to that?
agree.
Okay. I was going to say, I think that's a little unfair of a position for administration to be in. I would find it extremely odd to suggest that anybody would speak against having higher reserves to work with. Seriously, I mean, it's just, of course, more is better. However, there's 7 people that have targets on their back when it comes to putting those reserves there. So I think that's a question that certainly council needs to talk about by all means.
So if I may continue, it's just the interest wasn't almost really relevant when it was 2%, right? It was just, it wasn't an issue. But now are we back to reality of having, I know it's 6 3/4, and even if it comes down to 5, but on the amount of principal we're borrowing and future inflation, it's going to be that much even more significant going forward.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. On table 2, that last line, the offsite development levy reserve, like transfer from and then transfer to, could you just sort of explain that that one block to me? I'm not quite sure I understand what's going on there.
Yes, Councillor Hibbs, we need to do a little bit of investigation and clean up some of our offsite levy accounts. Some of them are currently in deferred revenue, some of them are in reserves, and we want to break them into the appropriate categories. We've created a new offsite levy for roads, and we're removing a more general offsite levy reserve category. So we want to go through and investigate where those funds that are in that reserve belong, whether they belong roads, water, wastewater, and put them in the proper category. So basically, it's just taking what exists right now and putting it in the proper category where the agreements were agreed to, and make sure that we have our accounts in proper order.
And then just further to that, it appears that there's a negative sign in front of that number. Could you sort of give us some background on why that is the case?
You bet. So the developer agreements are typically, we are front-ended by the city. So if we have a new area that we develop, we will put in the roads and the infrastructure for that new area. And then as people come on and develop within that area, they will sign an agreement with the city and pay us a source of offsite levies or funds. So usually it's in a negative balance because we're front-ending it. Often it's recommended for that case we would borrow and the interest would be charged back to these reserves so that we're charging back through our agreements the funding, the cost of funding those development growth. But it's separated from normal infrastructure maintenance of the city. We want to separate growth as a separate category, and that's why they're kind of kept in a separate bank account, so to speak.
So this would be sort of a sole example of where you would in fact have a negative balance probably regularly, as opposed to all the other reserves, which would be either zero or a positive amount.
That's correct.
Okay, we don't ever see a situation where it's a negative.
Just if there's been poor planning or we haven't been allocating properly to that reserve, but we should catch that on an annual basis and correct it.
Okay. I guess, yeah, my point is I just never want to see a negative in any other situation. It's not a matter I don't want to see it. I just don't think it's not appropriate. Like it's not a, to me, a very transparent way of dealing with our money. If we don't have enough in reserves, then where's that coming from? It's not negative out of a reserve that it's coming out of general. It's coming out of somewhere else, right? And I think that needs to be reflected. So I appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I have a few questions. I understand the reasons why we're making all these little separate reserves in some instances. And yet I wonder if it isn't easier just to have an overarching reserve bank. I mean, we have enough trouble trying to put money into the Community Builder Fund Reserve. And now we're supposed to put money into Urban Forest Reserve and Environmental Reclamation Reserve. Something tells me I don't see a lot of money going there. Maybe I'm wrong, but you know what I'm saying? We have hard enough time. So I'm wondering if, yeah, I get why, but I'm wondering if it's still easier to have an overarching reserve rather than all these splinter ones. That's just a comment. In terms of name changes, public transportation to accessible transportation, I don't quite understand that. Public is still, are we saying now it has to be accessible to all now future public transportation, or is it, I'm just a little.
The public transportation reserve really related to the Connex bus. And that's where the money has been going in. And so we're just trying to make a name that better reflects that reserve. And it is kind of a separate activity than city functions. So it's money that's coming out of the social planning business unit directly to refund the replacement of the Connex bus.
Okay, no, thanks for that clarification. I was thinking something entirely different. I was thinking public transportation, not, okay. And lastly, just further to Councillor Hibbs' comments about offsite levies. Yeah, so isn't the idea behind offsite levies more than just roads, water, and wastewater and water? Are we not putting some offsite levies towards future fire halls? You know what I'm saying? In outlying areas, or is that not reflected here? Am I in the wrong area altogether?
Go ahead, yep.
So note that your thinking is right, but right now we don't have any master plans that apply a benefiting basin for large recreation facilities or new fire facilities other than the replacement of our existing hall. Replacement of existing halls is not eligible for offsite levy funding. And without those master plans that show the recreation expenditures in the benefiting area, it would be difficult to justify to developers what we're actually collecting for. And so you'd either have to keep it so low that it wasn't worth collecting or face legitimate questions about how you're charging it. So we just haven't set those up because you're not charging, or we're not charging for that under our offsite levy bylaw right now. You had also asked a question about the reclamation reserve. I'm not anticipating significant funds that council, says, oh, this is a year I want to put 100,000 in there. But there are certain legal obligations. So when you open sand pits or actually there's new public sector accounting guidelines that are making you put away for certain asbestos abatement, for example, on municipal buildings. So there is actually legislative requirements to put money in there. Right now there's about 400,000 that we've earmarked for cleanup of an aggregate pit, and then the public works facility at some point. I hope that's adequate. I'm nervous about that. At some point, I think you will likely end up disposing of the former Parkland Regional Library building, hopefully many years from now, but having money there would be nice to have. So we do have specific purposes that we've put to each reserve, but that is a valid debate of whether you want to have, you could just have one operating reserve, one capital reserve, and it all comes in and out and it's all a big accounting spider thing, or have these reserves and it's the same amount of accounting.
So as far as the administration looking after all of these, it's not like we have a whole bunch of different reserve accounts. It still is basically lump sum. I do like is that correct in assuming that?
It's actually separate account codes, but it is under the reserve category. Like it rolls up to one category in the financial statements for sure.
Okay. And I guess it's not going to make us put any more money overall to reserves, generally speaking. However, it certainly will go to the appropriate place where we want it to, or more appropriate, more accurate than it has been in the past, perhaps. So I like that part of it. There's a few names here I was curious about. What all does the perpetual care reserve take into consideration other than cemetery?
The perpetual care reserve is a restricted reserve. It's required by the Cemetery Act that we put money away into a perpetual reserve. And the money that goes into that reserve stays and remains there. It's the interest off of that reserve that will come back into operations and help fund the cost of the cemetery. But it's intended to grow, and it'll be one we can't use for other purposes. It's legislated.
So it is specifically then just for ongoing care for the cemetery?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Which is fine. It should be called that then. Let's call it perpetual cemetery care. Then it's pretty clear. So there isn't. And we'll get people like me wondering what else it's for, because I assumed that's what it was for, but I thought there might be other things as well. So, and to be clear then, the offsite levy with respect to the roads, there still is a whole host of other items, as was alluded to by Councillor Connick. It's just this was the only new category that was that was issued at this time?
That's correct.
Gio Gowdy?
That is correct, but Director Thompson pointed out to me that actually the new offsite levy bylaw that you will be considering in the coming months does include contributions towards the fire hall. And so a new reserve will need to be set up if and when that bylaw is passed, so that we're able to, we can keep it separate even under the current structure, but to be consistent, we would also at that time recommend creation of a new reserve. So my apologies for that earlier error. Thank you.
Those are all the general questions that I had. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So in the policy, it says that we'll review this once a year, correct? So being on the police commission, we get a report every month. And I know that you have explained to us that it's the same every month, but I just wondered if once a year is enough though. Like maybe, I don't know, quarterly or something, just to have a look at it. Not necessarily so much as watching it as just the reminder that that's what we are doing, or even for the public that we do have health reserves. It's just a suggestion there. But I guess, yeah, go ahead. I got another question.
Just part of the new reserve reporting, we'll be looking at optimal balances. So the timing of the reserve report coming back at the time of the 10-year capital plan kind of coincides. Ideally, we want to fund our 10-year capital plan without too much borrowing. So at that point, we can see what we have for a balance currently, what's committed in our current projects that are underway constantly, and then what we want to have left over for next year's capital projects. So it's tricky to, we can definitely give balances quarterly, but it won't mean a lot because we usually don't fund the capital projects until they're near completion or at the end of the year. So there's not a lot of change from, like, it's like a balance sheet account. It doesn't happen regularly like an operating expense. So we definitely, you know, your last report will be as good as until the next report. We could do it more frequently, but another time might be when we do the year-end surplus and we're choosing to fund certain reserves. Maybe the reason we're funding those reserves is they're not at their optimal balance. So maybe twice a year would be ideal, but I wouldn't recommend more than that.
And I appreciate that because I know that was some of the discussion for sure at the commission as well, but it was an awareness thing, and the commission has certainly appreciated being more aware of that. But then you answered my second question, because I wondered what is the optimal balance? Like what kind of, where should our reserves be sitting as a municipality? And I guess it's not a perfect number. It has to line up with our capital plans. So it's all good.
It depends on the purpose of the reserve. So if it is infrastructure maintenance and repair, we want to fund those projects, an average of those projects over the 10-year plan. IT reserve is a good example. It takes a 10-year plan and it takes the average contribution required to make that happen over 10 years. Some years may be higher, some may be lower, but that's the ideal balance in the infrastructure maintenance reserves and the operating stabilization reserves. We've just come up with a best practice across different reserve policies that, you know, if you were to have a major blip in your environment or a major catastrophe, you could fund for a period of time. So there's some optimal balances that have been put in on the reserve descriptions. They may change as time goes on, but they are kind of our goal to begin with.
Thank you for that. There was one that I did think of after I spoke earlier, was the utility operating reserve. Given that most of our utilities work on a cost basis, I was just curious.
This would be
like
a rate stabilization reserve. So in the case of utility rates are set ahead of the time, and you know, obviously it's based on use. And if for example the utility functions were different than tax supported functions, if they should run into a deficit one year for a certain reason, this reserve could help fund that deficit. So it's not hitting the burden of the taxpayers. Likewise, if there's a surplus at the end of the year within the utility operations, it could be transferred to the reserve, so it could stabilize rates. If costs are going up extremely high and you don't want to increase the rates as high, this reserve could be used as an option to keep the rates lower and fund a little bit from the operating reserve. And the reason why we have 3 operating reserves, one is for the police commission, one is for the tax supported operations, and the third one's utilities, it's because there's 3 separate kind of functions that we would treat as separate businesses.
Thank you for that. I'm not totally sold on the utilities one, to be honest with you. The rate stabilization, I guess, sure sounds good in theory. As far as it being a burden to the taxpayer, well, they're the ones putting the money in the first place. What's the difference if you're putting it ahead of the time or at the time when it's of need? So that's an interesting one. I would also suggest that the rate stabilization portion, that's if there's an expectation that it will go down at some point in time, which history would suggest that that's not a real viable expectation. So yeah, that one I really struggle with. The other two I can see, but on one that's based on a cost recovery thing, that's a bit of a harder sell for me. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Within our strategic plan, we obviously have some master plans, social and I think recreation within our term. Even if we outsource that for a study, is that possibly something that should be looked at sooner than later? Because I wasn't identified as that high of a priority at the time, but does that allow us more information to make better decisions pertaining to not only reserves, but our capital plan and so forth? Like, because obviously at the time that we prioritize it, it's high to low, and it's, I don't think it's not till year 4. So should that be something to be reconsidered? And for the purpose of reserves and your capital plan and whether reserves need to be increased.
So you do have, thank you, social master plan and recreation for a gap analysis. I shouldn't say master plan. It's not a master plan. It is a gap analysis that will support council's decision-making and the rec board's decision-making with the Community Builder Fund. So it'll be actually hopefully guiding a number of groups that represent council in where those gaps are in Lacombe to make sure that exactly those things are being funded. I don't think that it was the 4th year though. That's what I was just playing.
It begins this summer.
Yeah.
And will actually be finalized next year. So straddles the 2 years.
Just a reminder, only because I had a meeting today with some of our regional partners at the county and the Mayor of Black Falls, and let's make those reports available to them with respect to recreation, because that was one definite area of interest. As was said earlier, some of these projects are becoming extremely expensive, and I think it's a realistic expectation that some of the amenities that we all like to have are going to possibly become more regional in nature, simply due to the prohibitive high costs. So let's keep that in mind when those reports come out. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Not to stop debate, of course, because that can continue, but I'd like to move that council approve the proposed financial reserve policy for immediate use.
Thank you. Any additional items? All good? Very good. Then I think that that motion is up in your machines now. Please go ahead and vote. And that is in favor unanimously. Thank you. Any others for consideration? Councillor Hoekstra?
I move the
I'm sorry.
council rescinds the reserve and equity accounts policy 13.201.01.12.
Housekeeping there, any input? It's up in your machines. Please go ahead and vote. It is hereby rescinded for the equity accounts policy unanimously. Thank you. I believe that was all the items for request for decision. Unless somebody has an additional motion, Councillor Hoekstra.
I'll move that council approves the changes in reserves as identified in Table 1 and Table 2 within this report with one slight change. The name of the perpetual care reserve being Perpetual Cemetery Care Reserve.
Anyone else? Please go ahead and vote. I think I may have been a little ahead of the curve there in that expectation. I was reading the wrong motion. It will come up shortly. Legislative Coordinator Bella Bono.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I just wanted to confirm with Councillor Hoekstra if you're okay with us putting as amended, and we'll ensure the wording is changed. Okay.
Thank you for that. And while that's up for your consideration now, everyone. Up for Councillor Hoekstra. Thank you. And that is unanimously approved as well. Thanks, everyone. So in addition to the 3 in-camera items that we have for this evening, I'll go through the upcoming meetings on all 3 are regular council meetings held here in Chambers at 5:30 p.m. for Monday, April 24th, 2023, Monday, May 8th, 2023, and Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. We can add those to our calendars. And I think that takes care of all of our public business and brings us to in camera. That is, if we have a motion. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll make the motion to go into camera.
Thank you very much. 21 by my clock. Please go ahead and vote. That's unanimous. Once we get the indication from IT, we will be